we have started really experimenting with different AI tools and finally have come to the conclusion that the technology is just getting so good that we can't ignore it anymore. And it is able to produce content at a very high quality level if you know how to use it properly.
This might get me in trouble, but it's honest, so I'm going to say it, is a few things that you did not say that I will be the bad guy and say. I don't think a lot of these marketers or agencies even know what good quality content is, and I don't think they were producing it before AI.
Things are really going to change in the future, and this is kind of why I wrote that piece around AI is going to be the age of the creative marketer, because the more creative ideas are the ones that are going to win going forward. I truly think that in the next 2 to 3 years, producing just written word content from those really good content teams will become table stakes, and the really, really good content teams are going to be the ones that just wow people. The pieces of content they create, people will never have seen something like this before because AI enables them to build just any of their ideas now where they just wouldn't have been able to execute on it before.
Welcome to another episode of the Grow and Convert Marketing Show. I'm Devesh. This is Benji. Today, we are going to talk about how our agency is using AI. So unlike a lot of our recent episodes that are more our perspective on how to do XYZ, this is going to be a little bit more of opening our door and kind of talking about how we're approaching it. So Benji, take it away.
Yeah, even that intro might be surprising for some people. I know we've kind of gone back and forth on our thoughts of AI over the years. I think we first started talking about it in 2023, right when ChatGPT was released. And I even have an article here that I can share, just kind of sharing those thoughts from the early days. So I actually looked at the date when this was published, not the last updated date, but it was published in May 17th of 2023. And as we started playing around with AI, I wrote this post to kind of share our thoughts at that point in time, which was essentially that if AI content is going to do a lot of the things that people said it was going to do. So these were some of the predictions at the time, and I can kind of walk through which ones we think have kind of come true and which ones haven't. But AI is going to remove the need for writers. I still don't think this one's true. You're going to be able to produce 10x the content with AI. This one actually might be true, but we'll get into more of the details around this. Search is going to become way more competitive because companies will be able to churn out hundreds of blog posts in the amount of time it takes a human to produce one. This is also kind of true, but we need to talk through some of the details of this because there's a lot of companies that are doing this now that see an initial spike in results and then see a massive decline because they're just not approaching this the right way. Keyword strategy won't be important because you can produce so much content that you'll be able to rank for anything. I still don't necessarily agree with this. Yeah. Writers will become prompt engineers. This one actually is fairly true, and we'll kind of explain how we're thinking about this and how our team is starting to think of this. But I do think this is true in that I think the way that you produce content is going to change from a writer needing to write everything themselves line by line to almost being more of the orchestrator. The orchestrator of the content piece. They have the idea in mind of what they're trying to achieve, and they're working back and forth with an LLM or some content production tool to get the outcome. And they're still writing, but they're writing in smaller chunks, and they're writing their original ideas into the LLM, and the LLM is helping them organize those thoughts into a cohesive piece is kind of more how I'm thinking of it.
We hope so.
Yeah.
And I think that's the perfect segue, actually. The last 2 or 3 of these points is the perfect segue into the first thing I think you want to talk about, which is quality, or the next thing you want to talk about, which is quality. Is like, we hope they're doing what you just said in terms of prompt engineering. But from what we have seen and heard, including from other clients, our clients' experience with other agencies and vendors, many are just doing straight automated AI content that is barely, or in some cases, we have been told literally not touched by a human. And in our view, that is AI slop. That is dangerous. And that is exactly what you talked about, which is multiple people have reported in the SEO industry that has led to this spike in traffic, followed by some sort of shadow type penalty by Google, meaning you're not going to see it as an official penalty with an email and a notice on Search Console. You'll just notice that a lot of your traffic has absolutely dropped off the face of the earth, and it takes a long time to get back.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to this post in the very beginning because it's going to tie to some of the things we're going to talk about in this episode. But essentially, I say all these arguments center around the theme of companies being able to do way more with less, but none of the conversation is focused around the quality of AI content and if your customers will actually want to read anything produced with AI. And I think this part of this post becomes true and it's still relevant today because the way a lot of the agencies and marketers in-house are approaching AI is still around this theme of doing more than less, but they have sacrificed the idea of quality content because they have this idea that if they can just rank for a bunch of different keywords or produce a bunch of content, that quality doesn't really matter anymore. And I do not think that this is going to pan out well for a lot of the agencies that are just producing really high volume at the expense of quality, or the same with the in-house marketers that are producing things at the expense of quality. So I think what we want to argue today is that the way to use AI going forward is, yes, you are going to be able to produce more content with less resources, but if you're sacrificing that quality bar, it's going to come back to bite you in a big way. And the focus of how to use AI should really be around how do I produce more while maintaining that same quality bar that you had before.
Before you get into the details, and I think you're going to get into the details of how we are starting to use AI to help with content production and speed, but maintain really high quality, I'm going to say some things on what you just said about why it seems like your observation that others aren't doing it. This might get me in trouble, but it's honest, so I'm going to say it, is a few things that you did not say that I will be the bad guy and say. Also, I don't think a lot of these marketers or agencies even know what good quality content is, and I don't think they were producing it before AI. Like, maybe it's not going to get me in trouble because we kind of said this many years ago with our post on Mirage Content.
I even said it actually in that same post that I shared.
Good.
The next
it makes me seem like less of a bad guy.
No, the next H2 is ChatGPT is Mirage Content 2.0.
Yeah.
Because I think what I argued here, and I still see the main problem being, is that people took a bad process around content production and then amplified it using AI. So if they already weren't doing things like focusing on getting originality into their pieces or unique ideas, the company's thoughts, and weaving that into the content, then they already weren't doing a good job at arguing.
They took a lazy process and made it lazier. That's what AI lets you do. So like what I was objecting to is the way you phrased it gave them too much credit 5 minutes ago, where you phrased it like they had this choice of high quality versus not, and they're choosing to go with high volume over quality. And I'm saying, I'm not sure 90% of these people even had a choice because I don't think they could produce quality content before. They don't have the taste for it. They didn't know the process of it. They didn't create that. That's why we wrote Mirage Content a million years ago. And that's why you're calling this Mirage Content 2.0. Like, in order to be able to produce quality content from AI, you're right. First, you have to have the desire to do it. You're right. And we sort of approached it being like, quality content is our lifeblood. That's what's built our entire business. And so therefore we need to figure out how to do it. You're right. They need that intention. And then, but what I'm saying, which is maybe the part that's going to make me look like cocky or whatever, is then you need to actually be able to know what quality content is and have some kind of process pre or without AI to even do it in order to have a hope of doing it with AI. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
Fast forward to today, I still think a lot of the arguments in that post were true, which is that people are thinking about quantity over quality, and that they're taking a bad process and kind of amplifying that. Yeah. And I think when we wrote that post, the main LLM at that point in time was ChatGPT. And the problem with ChatGPT was that it hallucinated a lot of what it wrote.
It wasn't even ChatGPT. All models back then were sort of heavier on the hallucination, and they just weren't as good.
Yeah. So we were more anti-AI writing at that point in time just because of where the technology was. We had tested things out, and we continued to test things out over the years to see how good the technology was getting and if it could basically replace our writing process or the way that we wrote. And in the last 2 to 3 months, or even in the last month really, we have started really experimenting with different AI tools and finally have come to the conclusion that the technology is just getting so good that we can't ignore it anymore. And it is able to produce content at a very high quality level if you know how to use it properly. And so essentially what we're starting to do is trying to mimic our approach to writing the manual way and doing it in AI tools. Because again, I think it all starts with having a good process. And if you don't have a good process, then no matter what tool you use, it isn't going to fix your content problem. It's not going to turn bad content into good content. But what we do believe now is that AI can really help us produce content at the same quality bar much faster. And the different thing is it can actually enable us to do things that we weren't able to do before. And so I wrote this post last week, AI in the Age of the Creative Marketer. And in this post, I argue that essentially the last 10 to 15 years has been the age of the performance marketer, the data-driven marketer, where everything was measurable and marketing largely fell to performance marketing channels. So content marketing all the way direct to attribution, paid marketing, direct attribution, everything was about measuring everything. And basically the marketing craft all skewed to measuring performance and really data-driven marketers. And the more creative marketers that had these large ideas for campaigns and things like that weren't really able to execute it because they didn't have the resources available and couldn't get the budgets to approve a lot of their ideas.
And by the way, if I can interject,
Sure.
we were part of that, very much part of that. Our whole positioning and strategy and framework around bottom of funnel was part and parcel with that thinking. That the whole argument around pain point SEO is that when you look and measure the results, these bottom of funnel articles convert a lot higher. And to give credit to sort of this, what you're calling creative marketers, but I would say maybe top of funnel brand type marketers, is that this cultural ethos that you're speaking of in marketing, where it became numbers and performance driven, hurt folks that focused on marketing tactics and strategies that were more top of funnel or brand based. And we have mentioned this before, I believe in an episode here, if not definitely in our content before, that please don't mistaken us, or I don't know the right phrasing, like please don't take us the wrong way, let's say that way. We're not saying there's no place for top of funnel. Absolutely. Any marketer worth their weight in salt knows that the ultimate dream for a brand is to have so much brand recognition that you just end up getting this kind of word of mouth kind of dominance in your space when people are thinking about it. And ultimately that's going to require some brand marketing, right? And some top of funnel type stuff. And that ties into what you're saying here is there was a pull away from that to things that were directly attributable. Paid, what we're talking about, a bottom of funnel, and where you're going to go is now AI search is muddying that.
Yeah, so creative marketers or things that you couldn't measure weren't really getting budgets from a lot of companies. Like the company was just like, if I can't really attribute it, I don't know if it's worth spending money on. But I think now having used AI for the last few weeks pretty heavily and just done different projects with it, I had this realization that there's going to be a resurgence of the creative marketer. And the reason is because the creative marketer, to pull off a lot of their campaigns or their ideas, needed multiple stakeholders in their company involved. And oftentimes the company couldn't justify spending money on these activities because they were really large projects, again, that were somewhat immeasurable. But now using AI, this creative marketer can execute from their vision to finished campaign or finished product with AI alone. And so it now changes this dynamic where you used to be constrained by the resources in your company to now you're kind of constrained just by the amount of ideas that you have and how much a single person can execute on. And so there's this big, I think what is going to lead to over the next 5 or 10 years is a big resurgence in this creative becoming very valuable because they're going to have tons of different ideas for ways that they can grow the company and now execute it on their own using AI, building their own apps, building their own mini products, building landing pages, building all sorts of stuff with AI. And so this person is now going to become very valuable. So we do talk about some of the things that we've discussed already. AI accelerates whatever you already are. If you don't really have a process or strategy, it's not really going to help you solve that problem. But if you do have a really good process or you do have really good ideas, AI is going to help amplify that and you can kind of 10x yourself. I also want to share that I wrote this post with AI. This was AI assisted again. And if you read it line by line, I would make the argument that most people wouldn't be able to distinguish this writing from my own. And it's largely because of the way that I used AI to help me produce this. This is all my own original thoughts. I didn't ask AI to come up with the arguments for me. I gave it the arguments and I used AI to help formulate the structure of this piece.
That's critical, by the way. People listening, if you glossed over this, should pause and rewind 10 seconds and listen to that again. Because that, I think, is the core of the problem that we were talking about with and without AI of folks that are producing low quality content.
Yeah, like I think this is going to become the key thing with content production is the quality bar needs to be, is the content indistinguishable from a human's writing?
Yeah.
And that is going to be the key thing going forward is when you can tell it's written by AI, and this is still where a lot of other companies are at, where we can read an article and tell if it's written by AI. If a human can do it, Google's going to be able to do it. Your customers are going to be able to do it.
Not going to. This is already happening. You're speaking in future tense, but both things you talked about are already happening. I guarantee you, whatever writer you're working with, no matter what they're telling you, they are using AI to help them write. Fine. I'll say 99%. Maybe there's 1% of writers. I'm sure there actually are because we've talked to some and they're very there's some folks that are just like staunchly, I'm never going to, whatever. But 99% are already doing it. So this is happening. And also most people listening, I think themselves are using it. They're probably helping it write emails. Like everyone is doing this. As an aside, I think that also ties into something you said at the very beginning, which is like, sort of, are your customers, it was in your article, are your customers going to be okay reading AI content? I think what I'm seeing culturally is using AI tools, and you're going to be, we're talking about like fancy agentic tools, but just like what things like our parents are using, like ChatGPT has sifted through the culture so fast, has spread through the culture so fast. People are getting so used to talking to and interacting with AI that I think that initial resistance back when you wrote that, let's say like roughly a year ago from when we're recording, where it felt weird. And it's like,
no, it was 3 years ago.
Oh my God. That was 3 years ago?
Yes.
Oh God. Let's see. It's hopefully the angles of this YouTube video, you can't show the number of gray hairs I have versus 3 years ago. Anyway, people are just used to it now. We're all kind of used to it. And so it's not as big of a deal. So they're doing that. And then the second thing you said is already happening. It's not Google will. I think Peak recently released a study, and everyone has talked about this, of Google is already punishing low quality content. And I think that merging of like, it doesn't matter who wrote it. We can just all tell when content is helpful or not, whether it's AI or human written. And that was our argument of the Google research paper. That was bad content way before AI. It was freelance writers showing up, Googling a topic and writing some basic article, intro this, guide to this, just summarizing it. It was poor quality. That was, people say AI slop. That is just freelance writer slop. And every company was doing it. And so slop is slop, regardless of who does it.
Yeah, I think it's worth giving a nod to Peak on this study. We've seen similar things. We've seen numbers of case studies being shown that the companies that are just producing a ton of content without a focus on quality, it's leading to bad results. And this study by Peak kind of shows the same thing, both from a visibility perspective, and they're also losing Google rankings. And so there's a ton of people just trying to use AI to produce content on their own. And again, they don't have that lens of quality. They don't have any original information in there. They're scraping different data sources to come up with the arguments for what's in the piece instead of relying on their own expertise. And it's just not working. For a lot of these people, they see this initial bump and then you see this decline right after. We had a client that we were working with late last year where they had worked with an agency that was just pumping out AI content and their whole site got de-indexed, including their homepage.
Oh, just to be precise, it was not de-indexed, it was indexed. They got what we have been referring to as a casual term of a shadow penalty. Yeah, like we said. I mean, so tying this back to what you were talking about at your process, and we discussed briefly before we started recording, but you can decide how much of our internal process we want to share. Obviously, to some extent, it's like a process that we are spending a lot of our time, you and mine, but also the whole team's time carefully honing. So, we're not going to share every detail of it because it's like sort of near and dear to us. But continue your story of producing that article. So we paused on, I think, the most important part, which is the ideas you did not seed to AI. And that's what we're saying people are making a mistake, is just automating it start to finish. Here's my AirOps or N8N process where I give it a keyword and AI researches what people are saying. AI structures and outlines it. AI turns that into a draft, and everything start to finish is AI. And so by definition, you don't have good quality ideas at all. That's not what you did here. That's not what we're doing.
Yeah, so in my own writing process for that piece, and I have produced, I think, 3 or 4 pieces in a little over a week, which is very rare for me. If you've looked at our blog, I haven't written in a long time because writing for me takes a lot of effort, mental effort of just clarifying the arguments that go into the piece before I even get to the writing stage. And then the actual writing process takes me a decent amount of time. I wouldn't say that I am a writer at heart. I am a marketer that can write. And so it's always been a little challenging for me to write articles quickly compared to the well-versed writers on our team. But the way that I've been using AI recently is to help me clarify a lot of those ideas up front. I think in the past, what I used to do is I used to call Devesh and we'd have 30 minutes calls, an hour-long calls, going through the arguments of a piece. And that was how I clarified the idea before I could write. And then I would sit down and write, and the article could take me 2 to 3 hours if I was really in a flow, or it could take me 10 hours if I was struggling getting through the structuring of the arguments. And I think over the last few weeks, I've gotten that writing time down to, at best, 2 hours, at worst, like 5 hours. So there is a significant time savings. And again, I'm not using it in a way of saying, I want to write this piece on AI in the age of the creative marketer. Can you write this blog post for me? I come up with the idea, I'm going back and forth, and I'm doing this in an iterative process. And I'm saying, here are the key parts of the arguments that I want in the piece. Here's the way I want to structure it. I give it a raw outline, and then it's helping me essentially craft the arguments in a way that makes sense. And then I'm doing a round of edits in the LLM, and then I'm also doing a round of manual edits after. So it's all of my own ideas, it's all of my own edits, and I'm getting to the outcome that I want much faster, but it's not a fully automated process. And I think that is the mistake that I see a lot of people making, is they're trying to automate everything. Again, I think if you're trying to automate everything and you don't have a good process, it's going to end up with a really, really bad outcome. Even if you have a good process and you're trying to automate everything, I still don't think it's going to end up with the outcome that you want, because every single piece that you write requires a slightly different approach. And it is not a cookie cutter process. Even with our agency, we have different styles of SEO pieces that on the surface kind of look cookie cutter. They're like an SEO piece going after a category keyword or an alternatives keyword. And a lot of them follow similar structures, but there's nuances to doing those pieces for every single account and every single piece that we do, that if we tried to take some fully automated approach and said, pull this information for this piece, structure it in this exact same way with these H2s, it's just not going to end up performing well, and it's not going to end up getting that uniqueness or originality in the pieces. And so I think this is still the mistake that I see a lot of people making, is they're trying to automate everything. And I think to get to that outcome where you have content that's very indistinguishable from a human, it really takes an iterative approach with AI and having pieces of those processes be automated, but not the entire content production process.
Yeah, an analogy that comes to mind, and this is not a perfect analogy, but I think it's instructive, is I had a conversation with a friend of mine that owns a business that's in kind of the IT development sphere, and he has an offshore team. And he said, Davish, this was like years ago, like early ChatGPT. He said, Davish, this has been transformative from just an English language level. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, previously, I couldn't have any of those members of the team be talking directly to clients just because their English wasn't good, their written English. And so now they can just say what they need to say. They're the developers working on the project, and then ChatGPT just turns it into native sounding English. So in that respect, all of the ideas, it's a developer like updating the client on the project status. The idea is in the developer, it's in their language, and ChatGPT just translates into English. There is a useful analogy. It's not perfect, but it's a useful analogy here to what you're saying. Is you're saying the way we're doing it, the way you wrote this article, and what we're experimenting with both for ourselves and for our clients, is the ideas is still ours. What you're using AI for is translating the idea into fully written English. In my analogy, it was from another language. But in this case, it's like you have all of the ideas, like this is what we want to say, this is how we want to flow, whatever. And it's that last piece of just turning it into polished, full sentences and prose that is very tedious. And that language generation AI is very good at. And another like peek behind the door that I'll say that you didn't say in our discussion is Benji, in setting up his process, had this conversation with this AI tool, and it even was smart enough to admit, like, I can't think of XYZ things that the previous articles that you wrote that you're wanting me that we're analyzing do. So you're gonna need to provide that. It was aware enough to know that like you need the original ideas. And so that's what we're saying. And AI is just there to turn it into language and fully polished English. And then even then you're saying, then you heavily touch it again 2 more times to be like, okay, now you got that down. It's like you're using it to just conquer blank page syndrome, which causes a lot of like hesitation in writing. Exactly. And then once you have that, you can edit from there pretty quickly.
Yep, exactly. So I think big picture, where I see this going is that the people that are good at content marketing, producing just normal written blog posts should become table stakes. They're going to get really good at using these tools to produce content at a very high quality. And again, I don't think that that's going to be a majority of people, but
I'm not even sure if I agree with that for the reasons I already like went on a tirade earlier in this episode about. Is like most people are not going to produce at a high quality.
Most people won't, but I think the good content marketers and the very good content teams, again, the ones that have a great process, the ones that are already ranking well, those people should be able to produce high quality SEO content, and just even like that essay, high quality content in general that is just written only, that should become table stakes. Where things get really interesting is I think the next iteration of content marketing is going to be people using AI to create very cool content projects that they weren't able to do before, or that would have taken their team a week or 2 weeks to execute on. And so these are, instead of just going after a keyword with written words, you can now build an app or a tool to satisfy search intent. And there's already been people doing this over the years, but I would say it's not happening as much as it could happen because those projects were really difficult to execute on. You would need to write something to go after that keyword, and then you would have to have a designer come in and design this mini app, design the logic for it. If it was like a tool or a calculator, you would have to have someone create the modeling behind that. Think of those skill sets. That requires someone that knows Excel really well, how to financial model, or how to like wireframe something.
And then you need dev resources at the end of all of that to turn it into like an interactive thing.
Exactly. Then it goes to design, development, and then all these companies were resource constrained. Their developers and designers were working on other projects. They're not gonna
Marketing's
like
last on the list.
Yeah, they're not gonna do content projects when when their same designers and developers are just trying to build their site and grow their business already. Like the marketing team never got the budgets for those kind of resources. But this is where things get really interesting in the future. If I look to the future of what really great content is going to be, the very good content teams are going to be looking at a keyword and thinking, what is the coolest project that I could do to go after this? It's what can I build? What can like truly differentiate this content piece than anything else out there? Can I make this page interactive? Can I make a quiz to go after this keyword? Can I make some sort of tool that really helps the customer? And these also don't need to be fully SEO driven, but the SEO driven ones will get the benefit of the distribution behind it. But I think things are really going to change in the future. And this is kind of why I wrote that piece around AI is going to be the age of the creative marketer, because the more creative ideas are the ones that are going to win going forward. Again, I truly think that in the next, let's say 2 to 3 years, producing just written word content from those really good content teams will become table stakes. And the really, really good content teams are going to be the ones that just wow people. The pieces of content that they create, people will never have seen something like this before because AI enables them to build just any of their ideas now where they just wouldn't have been able to execute on it before. And so that's where we want to go as a business. I think now if we talk about our own agency and how we see content changing, we're currently in the process of our whole team is experimenting with how to produce that same quality content that we've always been known for with AI so that it is truly indistinguishable from our writing process before. And we don't ever see a world where we're just publishing content at scale.
Yeah, untouched AI slop.
Or just content written with AI that looks like AI. Again, our quality bar is still going to be the same, whereas we're not going to publish stuff that looks like it's AI generated or that you could even tell it's grow and convert pre-AI versus grow and convert post-AI. But I think the really cool opportunity that we see is now starting to think about content differently in terms of not only going after keywords from a written word standpoint, but thinking through what is the most unique or compelling way to go after this keyword. What can we build? What can we do for our clients that is truly unique and differentiated that will help us get rankings just because it's so helpful to that user? And that's kind of where we want to go. I think for those that have been following us since the very beginnings of the agency, we were doing those kind of projects in the very beginning with our first few clients. Like we were doing crazy data analysis, and we have like some examples of what those pieces looked like back then.
And if you're listening and you're like, well, then why did you stop? It's because back then we did it in a slightly less mature way. But this was like, we're talking like almost a decade
This was
ago.
2000. Yeah, this was 2017. So serving 5,000 developers and then doing extreme data analysis on the cost of freelancers in different regions around the world. And these pieces got picked up by tons of publications because they were super unique. They had unique data that no one else had access to just because of the nature of their business. And we helped them produce this piece that kind of went viral in their industry. And I think it's these kind of content projects that AI now enables us to do again for our existing clients and for new clients, because now we have a tool that can help us analyze this data set very quickly. Whereas opposed, like I remember back then we hired some person off Upwork, or you used one of your friends who's very good at modeling in Excel to even do this piece, because to do this kind of data analysis was just very complicated back then.
So a few fun comments about this. First of all, shout out to them that from 2017 is still there. I think they've updated it. In the screenshot you were sharing, those graphs, they've like updated it, I can tell. I originally plotted those and designed it in like Keynote because I'm not an actual designer. I don't think Figma even existed back then. But the colors of those bars I picked because they're my Keynote defaults, and I still see the bar graphs have those same colors, even though they've like redesigned it. And to complete the story, I was saying, if you're listening and being like, well, you guys used to do it, like why did you stop? Is because of the exact reason Benji's saying, this resource constraint. Is we then, if you followed us long enough, we have articles showing this history. We then discovered pain point SEO and the conversion potential of bottom of funnel. So we shifted to doing that. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. If you're asking why, if you guys are maintaining the exact same quality and you think it's indistinguishable from pre-AI, why even use AI at all? And the answer is because it still saves time. Again, we're not going to reveal everything in our process because it's too near and dear to us. But what Benji is saying is we have figured out we're in the process, but very promising, and we're figuring out as we speak, how to produce our high quality using our process, but have AI assist us. Why? Because it saves us a bunch of time in that actual writing parts. And so now that it saves us time there, and it can obviously save time in doing this kind of data analysis. And even now, some of these are so powerful, they can help with designing and the HTML, CSS, and creating that, as Benji said, you would normally have to go to dev and design resources, which they always put the marketing and content team last on their priority list. All of these things save time, so now we can do both. Now we can continue to provide the pain point SEO, bottom of funnel, conversion heavy work for our clients, and go back to doing some of these pieces, which, by the way, you mentioned some from like using this more creative ideas to amplify your SEO content. We're also brainstorming doing straight up non-SEO content that can go viral and have other uses for our clients. And so that's really exciting. So it's still, the core reason is the same as everyone else, is this thing saves time. You can get more done. But if I can summarize what you're saying, it's that what we're seeing a lot of other people do is, oh, I can get more in the same amount of time. I'm just going to produce more slop. I was producing freelance writer slop before, what we called Google research papers, and I'm going to do it more with AI. And we're saying, no, we're going to use that time to keep the quality bar high and then do even more creative and cool stuff that normally was just an absolute resource like constrained thing you just like can't do as a marketer or a marketing team without a bunch of other resources. And that, I want to echo what you said, is super exciting. I think all of us have, like, it has invigorated kind of the team. There's just like ideas being spit out every day. Slack is super interesting. You and I are like texting or calling each other at odd hours being like, I just thought of this other idea. And that's been very exciting.
And I'll leave it with this. I think AI is going to enable us to improve many aspects of our service. So we have reporting that we're kind of rethinking now because we have access to be able to plug into different analytics tools and view analytics in a different way than a lot of the out-of-the-box tools allowed us to do before. So we're kind of rethinking that whole process. And then I think, as I think to the future, content will not only be about SEO. And it's not to say that it hasn't been so far, but I think because of the nature of SEO being the best distribution, we've heavily leaned on SEO as the way to drive traffic and conversions for our clients. But if I really think to the next few years in terms of how content will change, I think we're going to take the approach to SEO still being the foundational backbone, because that's the thing that compounds over time, but also now having other ideas and taking a more holistic approach to content marketing, where we can now do data pieces that get pitched through PR channels, or we just create such cool pieces of content that they just naturally get shared in the industry because they're so unique and no one else has done that kind of stuff. And that's really what we're thinking about going into the future here, is not only just how to produce our same quality content faster, but just how we can do content in a way that goes viral just because of how cool it is. And I think that's where the ideas for AI and the creative marketer really came from, because I think if I have a look into the future, I think that's where things are going to go, is the people that build the coolest things are the ones that are going to win.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. You can also get the audio-only versions of these shows wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow us at growandconvert.com/newsletter for any articles and updates for when these videos come out.